That's a really good question. I've never even considered it before.
Perfect. Thanks for coming today. You have just recently moved to Paris, is that right?
That's right. That's exactly right. This is the new apartment in Paris.
Oh, is it better than Sweden you lived in before?
I mean, I haven't had my first winter here yet, so I guess I should reserve judgment, but it's going to be lighter. That much I can pretty much guarantee, and
I
that's
can
good.
imagine. I can imagine. Actually, 15 years ago, when I started dating my now wife, the first thing we did when we started dating, we booked a ticket and we went to Paris in February, and it was
How
perfect.
is it?
It was very romantic and very
Mm.
nice. There was snow just one day. Most of the time, the
Hmm.
temperature was above zero, so not a lot of clothes you used to wear in Stockholm. You lived in Stockholm before
That's right. For a long time, 19 years I spent in Stockholm.
years, so yeah. So now you will probably enjoy something lighter a little bit.
I hope so. A lighter wardrobe.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, for people who don't know you, would you mind to introduce yourself and tell a little bit who you are, what you do in your work, or if you want, also what you enjoy when you are outside of work?
I guess we're mainly having a work related chat, so I'll try and stick mainly to that. But my name is James Trunk, and I'm VP of Engineering at Griffin. So Griffin is a startup, a banking as a service platform. We build an API first banking product for other companies to build their financial services on top of. So that's what we do. And we differentiate ourselves by being an actual bank. We have a UK banking license, so we can actually create savings accounts with interest for their money or for our customers' money or for their customers' money. And then just by having as clean and well documented APIs as possible and a sandbox. So even before they've met with us or signed up or anything, they just log in with their email, start building against our sandbox APIs. They can build their entire product for free. Yeah,
Yeah.
this works. Let's go for it, and then reach out and start becoming our customers. So that's what we do. And VP of engineering, my role is very much the people and process side of leading the engineering team. We have Alan, who's the co-founder and CTO, and he's heavier on the Clojure. So you should talk to him because he has loads of opinions about Clojure and programming. He's heavier on that, and I'm heavier on the people process part. So that's how do we work effectively together? That's the process. How do we have a process that stretches across the whole company? How do we gather the right requirements and needs from our customers and sort of filter them through the different parts of the org? And how do we build the right thing? So using the right strategy and then build it the right way. So I spend a lot of my time working with all the teams trying to improve how we do that.
And I
And
think
then,
things
mm,
are as crucial as the right technological choice. So yeah, during today we can definitely speak a lot about how to align teams and how to do proper people management in tech startup, let's say. Before being with Griffin, you have been a software developer who has grown into, let's say, IT management role. Have
mhm.
you always felt that you want to move away from, let's say, programming towards working with people?
No, that wasn't a planned career path for me. I really enjoyed the software engineering part and did it for maybe a decade. And it was only when I turned up in Sweden and I just basically randomly got a job where I was assigned a team lead role because I was the only non-consultant in the team. And they had in that company, they had a policy that consultants shouldn't normally lead teams if it's avoidable. So I was the most junior person on the team in terms of years of experience, but I was the team lead. And so I was kind of forced into the spotlight, if you like. And I enjoyed it, and I missed, as is very often the case when you go from software engineer to leadership, you I was quite a good engineer, not world class probably, but pretty good. And then I went to being a bad leader because you're brand new, you don't know what you're doing. So that can be a bumpy start, but there were enough parts of it that I enjoyed, and it felt like there was this whole unexplored territory of potential for things to learn about people, about teams, about process. And so I really got into that. So over time, I sort of enjoyed the non-programming parts more and more.
Yeah, yeah. In development, I believe it takes a decade of sustained effort to become a good developer.
Hmm.
Most people, most of us started as teenagers, let's say. So
Yeah.
when we were able to start working in our 20s, we were already, let's say, for a decade working with computers, maybe trying Linux, working with databases, building web apps or games. For people management, do you think it's trickier or easier for you to get?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I've never even considered it before. My gut feeling is telling me there are parts of it that are trickier and maybe take even longer to get good at, and there are parts of it that are easier. I, I feel like with technology, there's such a breadth and the depth to it that almost everybody feels imposter syndrome because you can't know it all, and just knowing everything about one database is impossible. But to be a good engineer, you need to know not just that, but about so many other parts of the entire technology stack, and not just one programming language, but several, not just one programming paradigm, but several. It's there's so much to learn there. It feels like a never-ending trove of things to dive into and get good at. In management, maybe the breadth is a little bit less. I don't know. I mean, obviously, people are complicated, and learning about group dynamics and psychology and coaching and understanding yourself and understanding how people work together. Like there's a lot to dive into there. I'm not saying it's some tiny little thin slice, but it's just technology is so broad and so deep. I have a gut instinct that maybe it's a slightly smaller area of search, but I've never thought about it before. So I may have to take that back if I think about it more later and realize, wow, James, you were so wrong about that. But right now, that's my gut feeling.
A friend of mine who was a CTO of a company when they took it from zero to over 100 million users. For the
Wow.
first 7 years, he was extremely technical,
Hmm.
and focus was just on building engineering organization where people do right decisions. And then something switched, and he became people's person. And he has started pouring a lot of effort into understanding people. And I was sitting with him not long ago. Actually, I will interview him on this channel as well. So I was speaking with him, and he told me that as the organization changes, your lever changes as well. Because when you are a very small company, you are close to the technology, and it makes perfect sense. But later, when he was managing a team of 100, suddenly it's different. And I can know I manage a team of 100, and it is you need to know people's communication styles. And sometimes there are problems, and people never tell you. While in technology, you can always log things, or you can always evaluate the expression, and you can always see what's happening,
Yes.
which makes it more difficult when we speak about people. At the same time, with programming, you must be absolutely exact. While with people, sometimes you can say just achieve this or work differently in that, and it just works. And
Yeah.
people change their behavior. So I would say that management, from my point of view, is messier, and you need to read people more. But when you have right people in your team, it might be easier because once you say something that it must happen that way, it will start happening that way, and you don't have to spend hours and hours debugging the organization because people will debug it for you.
Yeah, I agree. And so many people are bad managers, right, around the world. They're just not good at it, right? They create a bad experience for everyone in their team, but
Yeah.
they don't get fired. So in that way, it must be easier because I think you can get away with being worse. Whereas as an engineer, if you're a really poor engineer, the PR reviews you're doing are not good, the code quality is not good, you can't get away with it in the same way, I think. So I think if you're lazy or bad, you can get away with it in leadership, unfortunately.
Yes, yes. And also there will be plenty of psychopaths in management.
Mm, mm,
Um, they are good in, let's say, pleasing certain people in the organization.
yes,
Then the rest of their team absolutely hates working with that team. And it might take a long time to remove these people, if only, if that's possible even. But yes,
I've seen that before.
is very difficult to learn, just like being a good developer. It's a little bit different. You call yourself direct contrarian. What is it?
Correct, contrarian. Correct.
Correct. What is it?
It's the idea of trying to think slightly differently and think about things from first principles over copying what other people are doing. So let me caveat that a little bit. You probably want to be copying at least a little bit what really successful people are doing. It's not a guarantee of success yourself. You know, if somebody is an incredibly successful tennis player, just because you copy their training regime or their diet, you're not going to become Roger Federer, right? But it's at least unlikely to steer you in the wrong direction. Whereas I think the mistake that many people make is instead of looking and aspiring at that sort of world class level, they're just looking around them. What are my friends doing? What are people in my city doing? What do people I know do? And they do the same thing. And that way, if you do the same thing as other people, it's difficult to achieve differently, to achieve past them, if you like. So yeah, the idea about correct contrarianism. So contrarian is to think differently, and then thinking differently is only useful if you're right. So there's a kind of rationalism aspect to this. That if you think differently but you're wrong, you're going to be doing the wrong strategies. You're going to be going in the wrong direction. So just being different isn't enough. You've got to be different and correct, and that's actually quite difficult because sometimes common wisdom is there for a reason. Sometimes people do something one way because that's worked for a very long time. So it's a risk to try this approach. It's sort of a high risk, high reward attitude towards trying to achieve things. So the correct part is very much about assessing, doing root cause analysis, thinking about what are the underlying principles at work here and what am I trying to achieve. So you're very goal oriented, goal focused, and then you're adapting your process and your way of thinking, hopefully with feedback loops, so that you can learn as you go. You're not just committing to one thing and that's it.
Yeah.
A bit like with software development, you want to iterate, you want to learn, and you want to learn as quickly as possible. It's the same with this. So you probably won't start off fully correct. You'll be contrarian, but probably a bit wrong. But then hopefully over time, you'll adjust and get more and more correct.
Yeah. Also, one thing is when you want to be a contrarian, you can focus on low-hanging fruits. So you see something that works well in a different field,
Yes.
change it, adapt it to be, for example, in tech, in software field. So those things might work perfectly. If it works perfectly, let's say in UX design, you can say, okay, it will work here. So at Griffin, you use ShapeUp, which is used by Basecamp team, and you have to adapt it exactly for the process. I would like to speak with you about those, let's say, low-hanging fruits.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of topics. First, assuring quality. Like, what would you see a contrarian take of what's low-hanging fruit of assuring quality? What, let's say, most companies don't do, or many companies don't do and might.
So I can tell you how we do it at Griffin, our approach, our mindset to quality, and then I'll leave it to you and the listeners to judge how contrarian it is. I don't think we're that contrarian on this, but I'll explain what we do. So we go heavily all in on automated testing. That's not that unusual, but when I used to work for an investment bank, I used to do due diligence before there was mergers and acquisitions and things. And you would go in and you would look at people's code bases and you would be shocked at how many I saw that had just zero tests, not a single test. And obviously the better companies the better the company is, the better the engineering practices, the more likely they have PR reviews where they don't let code get in that doesn't have tests. But yeah, there's some rough code bases out there. So not everyone is doing that. But it's not just automated tests as in, well, let's do the classic pyramid and let's have loads of unit tests, some integration tests, some end-to-end tests. We're even stronger with it than that. And we look at what's the best kind of testing that matches our use case. And we do a lot of property-based testing, which is, if people don't know, it's where you fire randomly generated data that has a particular shape using a schema or a specification, and then you code a property that should be true that's invariant for that function that you're testing. That's extremely powerful. We do contract-based testing. Alan did a talk at the last Juxt conference about it, so people should go and watch that. It's a brilliant talk. So that's a similar idea, but at the API level rather than the function level. So again, you specify a contract for an API. Let's say it's a third-party payment connection that we have where we're making real payments. You don't want to make real payments when you're testing. You don't even want to rely on their sandbox environment because that's not going to be reliable. You want to have fast tests. So you write the contract that matches what they say their API has, and then you test against mocks that are based on that contract. So that's something unusual. And for me, it's all about confidence. So all of these different types of testing that we do, it's about speed and confidence. Because if I can go in and start doing a big refactoring or a big change or add a big new feature, run all of those tests and feel like, yeah, great, this still works. It's amazing. Connected to test as well, also technology-wise, we use Bazel, which is Google's open source version of their Blaze build platform. And that has some interesting properties when it comes to doing builds about the repeatability of them. But the one that's most interesting to talk about in this context is test, because it has test caching. It has static dependency analysis of your code. It knows which tests to run when you change a certain function or a big bit of it knows that these tests over here don't ever get near that code. We don't need to run them. So going back to fast feedback loops, that's another way that we try and think slightly differently. It's like, what are the best tools out there? What's the sharpest tool that's going to make us the most effective? Let's use that.
What do you think about pair programming, mob programming?
Yes. So that is a thing we do. We're not religious or fanatical about it. I like to pair with some of the engineers in the team. It's a way I still stay a little bit close to the technology and to the code base. So I do enjoy that. Although I'm rarely driving, if I'm honest. I'm often watching, but it's still fun and I try and add some value. Some teams do it more than others. It depends a bit on the dynamic in the team. It depends on the engineers and their background. It depends on how do they like to communicate and socialize with each other. So some engineers, they just prefer to solve difficult problems by themselves. So in those kind of teams, what often happens is they'll get together to try and figure out the plan. They'll architect the plan together. And then as quickly as possible, they'll try and break that down into distinct parts or tasks that they can then divide up and figure out how do we sort of go away, work on that, come back together, go away, sort of diverge, converge model. Whereas there are other engineers and other teams that have had really successful, previous experience with mobbing or pairing, and they love that approach and they see the benefits and the sort of tiredness cost that it has, because it is tiring to do it. They're okay with that trade-off, but there's no team that does 100% mobbing or 100% pairing.
I'll do this like for 8 hours per day. Even
so tiring.
No developer is focusing on the code 8 hours per day anyway, and actually a few meetings, answering emails, some coffee time is needed because
just to break it up,
overall, I would say people can focus on coding, let's say, for 4 or 5 hours per day at most. Some people would say even 3. Speaking of
it's a very energy intense activity, right? You can almost feel the glucose level in your brain go down because it's that you've got to put so much in your mind, you've got to build these invisible diagrams of how things are working, what the flow is. It's an intense activity, incredibly intense.
Yes. Another thing is, so my experience with pair programming is that, so most often it's seen that pair programming is the best when you have 2 equals on a similar level. I found that it's actually very useful when you have people where one is with the team for a long time and knows the code base very well, and the other person is being onboarded to the company in his or her first 1 or 2 months. And this might actually show how to solve problems, what are the tricks, how to work the whole system, how to set up certain things, get the database to certain state, and so on. So it might actually accelerate onboarding a lot, even when
I
these
really agree.
are not equals at
Yeah.
and the second problem.
I think there are three things that I love about pairing and mobbing. Maybe I can explain all three. You hit on one of them. That's knowledge transfer, especially onboarding. It's absolutely incredible for that. The second one is about quality, because there's two brains all the time. You just tend to spot things that we get through otherwise. And you also have that kind of zoomed out, zoomed in potential that can really help a sort of structural quality of a solution. Not just that you don't put that bug in or you name something slightly better, but that you take the time to really get that quality where you'd want it to be. Because, the worst of none of you gets in. If we're programming together, you're going to have different skills than I have, but when we're together, those can balance each other in a very powerful way. And then the third main one is about momentum. When I don't know what your experience is like, when you're working by yourself, it's quite easy to get stuck and feel a bit frustrated and like, I can't really understand why this test is failing. I'm just going to go and have a quick coffee break. And it can be difficult to sort of motivate yourself to get back into it. Whereas when there's two of you or a mob, there's just a momentum that builds, because if you get stuck, you just hand over and they have a go. And then when they're getting a bit fed up, so it just feels like the train keeps rolling in a very powerful way that really, in terms of delivery velocity, seems to have a massive impact.
And also, what I found that you basically eliminate all of those situations where there is just a typo in the code, and just one pair of eyes, you might not see it. But then the people, they catch it immediately. And so these...
That speeds you up, right? It sounds like such a small thing, but those little things can slow you down over time. If you have 10 of those things happen in a day, imagine how much faster you'll be if you immediately spotted all of those.
Exactly. What I found that it's tricky when you do pair programming or mob programming in Clojure is that people end up with highly customized Emacs's, and you can't use Emacs of other person because his keyboard shortcuts will be completely different. Somebody is using Space Max, other has vanilla Emacs with some extensions, and so this is trickier when I compare it with times when I was working in object-oriented languages and we were working with Sublime Text or whatever was popular at that day.
Yeah.
A decade ago, I switched to Clojure 11 years ago, but before that I was doing OOP. And if it was Eclipse, Visual Studio, everybody was using the same, and it was quite easy. Like even when we were using Eclipse and somebody else was using NetBeans, you could, because it wasn't such a big difference.
I agree. And not only that, you also learnt how to be more effective in that shared editor environment, because someone would know a shortcut that you don't know, and you'd be pairing with them and they'd do something, you'd be like, what was that magic? And then so those kind of speed ups also get spread around the team, and you don't get that benefit when everyone has a different editor, not just customized Emacs. We have people using Vim, we have people using IntelliJ, we have people using Visual Studio Code. So everyone has a completely different setup, and it tends to be more of a ping pong like pairing, where I will work in my environment with you watching and guiding, and then we will commit and push, and you take out. Do you see what I mean? So it's like shared that way, whereas the old school way of just rolling your chair over, like, get out the way, let me. I agree that goes a bit in the past.
Okay, if I can ask about another low-hanging fruit or the best practices, topic would be team alignment. Griffin has grown from 1 team to 9 teams at the moment, right? It must be a lot of work to align all teams to work in sync and to work toward the same goal. What would you see the best practices in team alignment?
Yeah, and that's a difficult problem to solve, and I'm not saying we've solved that problem at Griffin, but maybe I can highlight some of the things we do that aren't that common, maybe that would be interesting to people to think, oh, could that work for us too? So we do a a Monday morning cross-team sync where all of the teams are there, everybody in engineering. So it's kind of our broadcast meeting, but it's mainly about syncing and aligning. And we go through each team's current bets. That's what we call our current projects that we're working on. But we only talk about deviations from the current plan. So it's very much a future-focused, where are we a bit nervous about this, and what can we do to sort of, what are we doing to right the ship, and do we need any support? So in the same way that we try and make our daily stand-ups not about the past, it's not about what did you do yesterday. That's rarely an interesting question to ask, I think. I think the interesting thing is, what do we need to do today to be the most effective we can as a team? So this is that idea in a slightly larger context. So if people do that kind of, walk the board backward daily stand-up, where it's future focused, just imagine that, but at the sort of project level, it's the same basic idea. And making it about where we're deviating from the plan means that it's encouraging teams to constantly be thinking about, is the plan correct? Are there other things we can do to de-risk this? Should we be shaving things off? We should be scope hammering, as it's called in Shape Up, or should we be waving a flag early? We're going to need to extend the runway on this because we think the plan is correct. We think the tasks we've broken it down into are correct. We think the different milestone releases that we're working on to get fast feedback, they're all good. Nothing's wrong with the plan, but it's taking longer than we thought, because software takes longer than you think often, because you discover things as you go. So it can be that the plan's fine, but the date is wrong. Then we update the date, and then we're all on the same page about when to expect things. Yes. I think when you're syncing, it's about knowing what dependencies we have, where we're depending on other people, and when we can expect it. And then that goes even more so for the rest of the organization, because people in commercial are depending on a feature we're building. People in product marketing are depending on it so that they know when to start doing their work. So yeah, it's all about trying to create something that works in a symbiotic way like that.
All right. In Shape Up, you are creating, you usually have like one big topic per one cycle and a couple of smaller improvements. Is it difficult to balance work for all teams, to have not too much work and not, let's say, too little work at some teams?
Too little work is very difficult for me to imagine for us right now. But so we use this stabilized period. It's one of the phases in our sort of modified Shape Up, which is you've shipped a piece of work, you've verified that it's correct and meets the needs of the customer/stakeholder. Okay, now we're going to stabilize everything we've done on that work and anything else that needs stabilizing, so that we think we're going to be faster the next time we build something. So that's that piece of work. So there's a sort of natural balance in each team between the big work and the smaller work. And sometimes it can be that we have so much of that smaller work collected up that you can't fit it into those 2 weeks of stabilize. And then what we do is we actually compete against the product bets. We write an engineering, it's called a pitch before you actually start working on it. So it goes from being a pitch, which is like a sales pitch, into being a bet once we're betting on it. So you write an engineering pitch that's sort of a collection with a theme often about, if we improve this data model, we're going to 10x our speed for delivering the next 3 features, because they're all connected to the customer data model or the bank account data or whatever it is. So, and then we need to make prioritization decisions, again, at that sort of overall level about, okay, does that make sense? And we try and make it so that each team has autonomy for making those decisions within their domain. So it's not, the chief product officer or me as VP of engineering saying, yeah, you do A, then B, then C. We try and avoid that. And we try and make it so that we're giving a clear vision and direction about what's important for the company right now, what are the customers screaming for, and then let the teams then say, okay, then we intend to do A, B, then C. Okay, great. And if we're nervous, well, but hang on, wouldn't C make sense? Then we can, of course, challenge each other. But the idea is that the team feels that they're owning that choice. So big work and small work. And running out of work has never been a problem for us. We have a small team. We're running a bank. We have 40 engineers, which is obviously way more than in the beginning. But a bank is a big thing to be running with that few number of engineers. So yeah, our backlogs are long. We know what we need to be building for quite a while.
Yeah, when I was in consulting, I was consulting, let's say, agile testing, QA, and also change management. I
Hmm.
was running a transformation of a bank myself, and they had 150 developers, maybe 20 business analysts, 20, 30 testers. Exactly as you were speaking, that you are heavy in tests. They were very heavy in regressive testing, where the workload
Manual
was
testing with actual humans doing
manual
it, or
testing. So the workload was very low, and
yeah,
quarterly, when the release was coming, suddenly everybody was working 16 hours per day. And when it was over for another 2 months and a half, again, like 4 hours per day maybe. And one of the
yeah,
things I recommend was to automate everything. It took them years, but they managed. And yeah, you are doing a lot of work with 40 people. Most banks would do it with hundreds of people. At the same time, a big problem at large institutions is that you don't have to support only current laws, but you have a legacy. So when you have, let's say, 20 years of history,
hmm,
and if there was a certain standard how to store transactions or how to send transactions, you need to keep the old data in the old format. And as it is changing, basically in your system, all this, let's say, history stays within it, which is tricky. I know that you have just moved from Kafka to Foundation DB, but now imagine those like 1,000 lines long stored procedures in Oracle, which has to support various formats of how transaction can be represented in the
yeah.
database. So this is what they have to live with. It's not easy job, and I understand why they end up with hundreds of people, and why very often things that should be 10 days of work end up being 100 man days at those companies.
Absolutely. I've seen that so many times before with legacy systems. And imagine a bank that's been around for 100 years,
Yeah,
the age of some of the systems that they have to maintain and how they have to build things around it and make compromises. Every time they build a new system, they're compromising, which then creates more problems for the future, but there's
yeah,
just no way out of that spiral for them. So I feel for them.
yeah,
Luckily, we don't have that yet. And I
exactly.
think there might be ways to think about building it from the beginning where you reduce the chance of getting to that state at least quickly. I'm not saying
Yeah,
we're immune from getting into that state. We're absolutely not. All it takes is some bad decisions where you say, well, let's just leave that system and build another one, big bang on the side. And suddenly you've got two systems, right? And
yeah,
then someone else will go, oh, those aren't good, but we need that. We can't get rid of that bit of it, and we need that. Okay, let's build a third, and then you're lost. Whereas what we've been trying to do is build one in a way where not only are we building the right thing, like I said earlier, but building it in a way where we can rip things out, like we can rip out Kafka, put in Foundation DB, and everything else is the same. The tests are the
yeah.
same. The transducers are that there's a sign there you've architected it well if you can do that, I think.
Yes, yes. And you're right that sometimes they might try to replace it. Actually, at this bank, their systems were implemented in Visual Basic and not VB.NET. I mean the old Visual
The
Basic,
old one, yeah, I remember.
and over Oracle in stored procedures. All the business logic was in stored procedures, and the bad thing, I must say, hopefully, yeah, the NDA ran out a couple of years ago, so I can say they have started implementing the whole thing in Java, moved all the business logic to ORM, to Hibernate, and actually the new system, even when the code base was much cleaner, the system was much slower. And they are in 20 countries, so they have like 10 countries on the old system and 10 countries on the new system. And
Hmm.
by not using any power features of the database and using it as a dump storage and having everything in Oracle, in Hibernate, led to the situation where actually the new system has its own problems.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
it's
I don't want to judge their technical choices because it's very dangerous to do that. You don't know the constraints within the
yeah,
business. You don't know what skill sets people had. So I don't want to stand outside and say, wow, what a choice. Or, But there are technology decisions that you can make that are going to tie your hands behind your back more in the future. And I think a thing that a lot of engineers, and especially sort of CTO level, really experienced engineers, but they still make this mistake. They're not thinking about impedance mismatch. They're not thinking that we need to choose the right tools all the way down to where the
Yeah.
data is stored and all the way back up, so that we're putting as little accidental complexity in that chain as possible. As soon as someone says, let's go with Oracle, an ORM system, and
Yeah.
then convert that to the shape of data that we have in our OO language, like you've picked three technologies there that aren't really very compatible with each other, where you've added a huge amount of accidental complexity. It's nothing to do with your domain. Like an
Yeah.
ORM is nothing to do with banking. But imagine how many engineers they have to keep that Hibernate going. It's
Yes.
probably an immense number,
Yeah.
right? And so yeah, I try not to be judgmental, but you need to be careful with the technology you pick.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, even this new generation of software is already 15 years old. Like banks, when you are
Hmm.
building a system, you might end up supporting it for 3 decades, like the first system. And back then, I think they picked Hibernate and Spring as a safe choice. There
Yeah,
weren't that many choices back then, and I think fintech is more, let's say, less conservative with technological
I
choices.
agree. I
But
agree.
it's
Banks tend to be more conservative. They tend to not adhere to my correct contrarian approach, right? They're not thinking from first principles. They're not looking what's the best. They're not thinking how do we be world class. They're thinking how do I not get fired? Let's go with Java and
yes.
Hibernate.
Also, how are we going to hire 200 people
Yeah,
instead
but the
of
fact that you
asking
need 200
how,
people is because of the technology you picked, though. So
yes,
you kind of
yes,
create your own problem.
exactly. Instead of asking, can we deliver this with only 40 people? It's more like,
Yeah,
okay, 200 people, which means Spring and Hibernate or .NET and C
yeah,
Sharp.
yeah.
Um, it must
You
be
paint yourself into a corner with that,
popular.
right? You've just
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Speaking of another domain for low-hanging fruits, or a good take, how you would, let's say, approach this, motivating people. What do you think
Mm.
are the best practices in motivating
And
people?
you mean engineers specifically, or just
In
people in general?
development, when you are building not just engineers, but engineers, product managers, testers, QA engineers, how to motivate people to build high performing team.
And the classic model about intrinsic motivation, I believe it was Dan Pink that wrote the book Drive, I think it's called. And he talks about this AMP, or sometimes I've heard it called MAP map. So it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So that lives rent free in my head, and I think it's very important. So autonomy, why does that help with motivation? Because smart engineers want to unleash their full capacity, and the more you restrict them, the more they're going to feel hemmed in, and like they can't do the maximum performance that they can do. Mastery is, I think it's a psychological part of it, where as you get better at something and you feel like you're getting faster and the team feels like you're entering this that's just a nice sort of
Yeah,
positive feedback loop spiral that everyone feels good about. But I also think it's about creating space for learning and growing, that if an engineer is reading a new book because they're super fascinated about it, and that we're not using that technology right now, but maybe they do a brown bag lunch session that teaches, and then down the line we start doing so, there's a value to that learning that I don't think should be underestimated. And then the purpose part is really difficult. I think of the three, I think purpose is the most difficult, because that's about setting a clear vision. It's about giving a why.
yeah,
It's about motivating the emotional part of why am I spending my time on this? Why am I getting up and sitting in front of a computer when I could be off having fun, traveling, or watching whatever it is they want to be doing instead? And with Griffin, I guess our why is about the potential impact that you can make, because we're not a single fintech with one idea. One idea can be big or it can not be big, right? But when you
yeah,
build a platform that hundreds of other people can try their ideas on top of, you become more like AWS or Google or something, where now you're a conduit, you're a potential
yeah,
force multiplier for impact in the world. So that's the kind of angle I try to think about. And then back to autonomy, I've been thinking a lot about autonomy recently, and I'm not sure I get the balance quite right in leadership with autonomy, because although I know it's important, there's also, when you reach scale, there's also alignment
Yeah.
considerations. There's also, okay, process. I talked about process. We have a process. We use ShapeUp. Right now, it's not a free for all that every team can just. They're like, no, we're not going to do ShapeUp. We're just going to do Kanban. Or right now, that isn't something we've sort of accepted, or I have accepted. So there's a lack of autonomy, you could argue there. So autonomy with all of these things, I don't think you can be black or white, and I don't think I always get the balance quite right. I think sometimes I err too much on conformity and performance and scale and other things, rather than giving people the space to really explore and do exactly what they want to try, even if it's a spectacular failure, just because we're in a stage of a business where we can't afford too many spectacular, we're running a bank, right? We can't break things. So maybe it's made me a bit more conservative to be in a sort of highly regulated startup rather than just a move fast, break things kind of startup. But I've been reflecting a lot about autonomy, and I have a sneaking suspicion I don't maybe have the balance quite right yet.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I have prepared my answer to this, speaking of like productivity.
Please, I'd love to hear yours.
Okay, so first thing in development, we all just liked playing with computers. We liked building something. When I was a child, I have started programming and modifying Linux, not because I would do it for money. I had an idea that one day it might be a good source of income, but I wanted to build something. Mm-hmm. And I broke the computer so many times. I had to reinstall the operating system so many times. And I think if one can get good at something and have high performance, not a lesson. This is something I realized, but I have just read an article which sums it up. There is a preparation for practice and there is practice. Preparation for practice is reading about, let's say, Clojure, Polylith. Mm-hmm. And practice is that you install Foundation DB and you start saving data, reading data, and suddenly you see how it works, what are its limitations, how errors look like. And by reading a website, you have impression you are getting better and you might use it, while when you install it and do it, you suddenly find out that the reality is different and you are getting better. So practice is better than preparation. It's first.
I like that insight. I agree with it.
Second, I like one theoretician of management. His name is Harold Guineen. He already died. He was a managerial legend in 70s and 80s. He was a CEO of ITT, which was one of the biggest conglomerates in the world. When he started, it was a small company, and he has grown it immensely, adding hundreds of companies to portfolio, each of them having hundreds or thousands of employees. And he was sitting and working with hundreds of CEOs and CO levels all his life for decades. And one of the things, he wrote a couple of books on management, Synergies and Other Lies. Both are really good books. And one of the things I remember is, I think the chapter was called Nothing Works. And he said that you can't manage a company by one framework. Like for a while, everybody was lean. Everything was lean. Everybody wanted lean. Then it was Six Sigma. Everybody wanted Six Sigma, and everybody was managing to achieve Six Sigma. He was speaking more about like you should constantly build a tool set. So it's nice to learn Six Sigma, it's nice to learn about Agile, it's nice to learn about classic project management, whatever. And then at the right time, use the correct tool. So actually, he doesn't believe that there is one framework you can use forever. It will always change. You will always have to change. So you should learn even things you don't need at the moment. because one day you will use them. Third thing I have learned, and this is something I have learned in Flexiana as well, is that sometimes smaller, more senior team is much better than having larger team full of junior developers. Very often, people connect it with their ego. Like they think, if I will manage 50 people, I am somehow better than somebody who manages only 20 people. But what if somebody who manages 20 people actually achieves more than somebody who is managing 50 people? But managers, like when you manage somebody, the ego might be the part, and you always want more people in your team. And it might lead to, like, when you add nth person to the team, you have basically added n communication channels to the team. So
yeah.
5 people, it's the equation is n times n minus 1 divided by 2. So 5 times 4 divided by 2 is 10 connections between people. When you add from 5 people to 10 people, suddenly it's 45, 10 times 9 divided by 2. So it grows exponentially, and a smaller, higher productive team is much better. And last thing would be, I don't think, like, very often people speak about 10x engineers, but sometimes what you need is to build 10x organization where people can work together. When you hire stellar engineers, I have seen this. On one project, they were perfect. They were awesome, delivering plenty of great features, very useful. And then the same team worked on something else, and there wasn't a good fit. They didn't get to work together well. So it must be focused not only on the outcome of individual, but on the output of the whole team. Having a good habits, cutting off things that don't have effect. So one of the things that's very modern nowadays in software development is no estimates. I think that doing no estimates, it serves well for developers, because for them it might be a form of waste, but for business people it's a communication channel, because it's not just that the customer is buying software, but when you have a feature in your mind and you think, okay, it might take 5 hours or 50 hours, it's not that just that the developer is 10 times slower, but it might be that the developer thinks, okay, I must do this, and this, while the developer who thinks it's just 5 hours thinks, okay, I will just implement this feature. And he completely forgets, okay, there will be plenty of tests that must be changed or written and so on. And when the team sits down and does some estimates, all team members have to understand what exactly will be changed. So actually, this is a good thing to speak about how much it costs, how long it takes. Next thing, Flexiana for the first couple of years was async company. We did have no deadlines, and we had almost no meetings. And I changed it, and now we work more in a sync mode, and it's much more productive. When you know when you want to achieve something, and also we are full remote, but I found that having some FaceTime, speaking with each other, can actually clarify plenty of things, because we use Zulip, which is something like Slack. The communication, discussion over a certain feature can go days. And then you jump on a call, and in 30 minutes you resolve something. So I would say synchronous communication, even when full remote companies tend to be more async. So having some sync time might help. Next thing is developers hate pointing out underperformance of others.
Mm-hmm.
They don't feel good about it, but it's important, especially when you are a startup and you are lifting something that doesn't exist to become something. You must be better than others, and you can't just lift people, from the ground with people who just add weight, but not help to add thrust for the thing to fly. So it's next thing, and also it's connected to one thing. We are trying to keep decision close to people who are impacted and involved. Like, for example, in Flexiana, individual teams own their methodology. They can modify it. They have handbook that should make them somehow compatible, which is company-wide. But besides that, if they want to do estimates, they can. If they don't want to do estimates, they have to split tasks to be at least to 1 day, let's say. So they have a choice. They can have a rotating Scrum Master, or they don't have a rotating Scrum Master. They can do pair programming or mock programming. So decisions are close to people who are impacted, which means you have to build visibility for people to do manager decisions. Very often when you have a team lead, director, VP of engineering, he or she sees everything, like everybody's work. But when you let people decide, very often suddenly people don't see other people's work. They don't have this managerial oversight. So it's good to invest some time to give them access to see outcomes of other people's work. Otherwise, having autonomous teams could never work. You need to give people managerial tools if they want to self-manage.
Can I ask, because that's really interesting about when you're talking about autonomy, it sounds like you're primarily talking about how they work rather than what they work on. And that's interesting because I guess, do you think that each team has the best understanding and the best view on the most effective way for them to work? Is that your idea, that they'll just automatically self-select into the right way? Because I guess my worry would be that someone will come into the team, they've had bad previous experiences with pairing, so they don't want to do it, so they don't do that. They've had bad previous experiences with Scrum, so they say, let's not have a rotate. Different things kind of happened in their context that give them a certain perspective on things that could cause them to pick a certain setup that isn't actually very effective for that team. How do you avoid that happening?
Yeah, so the thing is, proper product management, we need to build understanding of what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So one example, we are working on business intelligence software for CTOs, IT managers, and teams to self-manage. And now we are working as the first of our early adopters is the biggest pharmaceutical company in the Czech Republic. They have well over 100 pharmacy stores, and they have also an e-commerce store, and they have over 100 developers in their team. It's unexpected that for a pharmaceutical company has such a big team, so they have to build plenty of insights. So in this team, I am the product owner, so I work directly with all IT managers and with their Scrum Master in the team. Actually, my wife used to work for this company, and my mother-in-law, she works at that company for 15 years already.
Wow.
A big coincidence. And actually, it wasn't a way how we got to work with them, but I know this company quite well. And what I do, I speak with the Scrum Master, I speak with individual managers, learn understanding. Over time, we are building this like long document explaining exactly how they work, how they look at things. Then I take it, I build wireframes of screens. I speak with the team multiple times per week, and I explain them what's happening. Over time, I would like to pick some of my colleagues who will have, let's say, higher EQ, and basically take over this responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So it is really plenty of communication, really, to build true understanding of what the customer needs, what they do, how they operate, to be able to build something that's useful. Of course, when you look at like old style pure developers, I was one of them. I can imagine living in the command line. I
Hmm.
was living in the command line back then. When I was studying computer science, I was using PacVM, which was, I don't know if you have heard about it, like extremely low level of window manager. And I was living in that shell and doing everything. When I wanted to play a movie, I will unpack the name of the movie and it opened the window. And I
Hmm.
lived like this. And I understand that many developers are like this still at this day. So you need to have one or more people in your team who are not like this, who are pro customer and who want to push this focus on being customer centric. And when one builds a team, you have to think who are the people in the team. And if the team will be 100% just nerds without interest in customers, no matter how good developers you got, it will fail. Of
Yeah.
course, it might be a different situation if you are building some rocket or something, that is not built for people, something that's built for research or whatever. It
Hmm.
might be different, and you might have 100% nerdy team. It might be perfectly okay. But when you are building for people, in each team, there must be customer-centric people. It's,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I honestly think the best engineers tend to have a product hat that they can put on. That you because you need to understand what the needs are that you're meeting to meet them well, and you need to care about it to be motivated and do it well, and you need to speak the same language and use the words that are used that maybe aren't as geeky or as nerdy, but they're the right one for the business or for the domain. And
yeah,
that way you can be consistent with the language from when you're talking with stakeholders or customers all the way through to when you're writing your pitch document. Use the same language. You write a little glossary entry. What do we mean by that word?
yeah,
And then we can all be on the same page with it. And then that word can go into the code and it can go into your database. And then there's a consistency. And when the language changes in the business, you should
yes,
update the code, because otherwise you've got an impedance mismatch. We were
yeah,
talking about that
yeah,
before. That can kill you over time. That adds a complexity that you just can't keep on top of, and you need more and more people, and you don't want more and more people. Like you said, I agree, you want small teams, you want effective teams, you want to reduce the amount of internal synchronization and collaboration and communication that's required to be effective. So
yes,
there's so much that you said that I agree with. I'd love
yeah,
to talk to you a little bit about estimates, because estimates is something I've struggled with my whole career, understanding what's the right way to do it. And I've sort of swung back and forth on them quite a lot. And I've landed somewhere that I can explain briefly to you, and then you can challenge me and tell me why that's idiotic. But so the way we currently do it is we ask for very rough estimates from the engineers early, just to get a feeling. And it's not, this is a commitment. It's not okay, now you've promised that that's going to take 2 weeks. You have, no, not that. It's just literally a rough estimate. And we encourage them to give it with error bars. So not how long will this take and pick a date,
yeah,
but how long will this take and pick a range of effort, which I
yeah,
think is a much more useful estimate, especially if you're communicating it externally. Then what we tend to do is boil that down to a date, but an internal date for the team. And that's for clarity. And it's going back to our weekly sync meeting when we talk about deviation. It's given the current plan, what's our confidence level that we can hit that date? And because it's an exact date, then we can be on the same page about it, because it's a sharper thing, a sharper goal that you're aiming for. Whereas if we kept it as an error bar, like, what's your confidence that you can deliver this in 2 to 4 weeks? Confidence is always going to be high, right? Because that's just how the human brain works. Whereas as you get closer and closer to a fixed deadline, the brain starts to tell you, oh, I'm panicking now, we're not going to make that, we need to shift the deadline, right? So maybe what we've come to is estimates can be useful. They're useful when they help you update and understand the plan. And the plan is the thing that enables you to synchronize with each other and with other teams. So having a good plan is way more important than having good estimates. So for us, it's not, we don't care if the estimate was deadly wrong. We care, is the current plan something you're confident about? Does
yeah,
that make sense?
yeah, it makes sense. Like for me, actually, estimates are not that important, but the process of estimation is
Mm, yeah.
because it pushes people to really build understanding what exactly will be built.
Yes. Yeah, it forces it. That's what the planning part of it is, right? You're forcing a level of design and understanding. We call it architecting. That's our phase where you come up with the initial plan. And the plan doesn't last very long, right?
Yeah,
Because reality tells you, whoops, your original plan was not quite correct. You need to adjust it. And that's fine. And you can use that feedback loop to refine, improve, and reduce, hopefully, sometimes the plan. But having a plan together with a set not deadline, but you understand a target,
yeah.
that's it seems to be helpful. I'm reserving judgment. I won't write a book about it yet, but there's something about that approach that we do that feels slightly different than other places I've worked, and it feels like it adds some value.
Yeah, if I would say I have one unpopular opinion about estimates,
Mhm.
most often it is said that the whole team should do estimates. I found that for if the purpose is just clarification, I let people who are likely to do that particular task to do estimates themselves, and then let the team to challenge estimates that don't
Mhm.
accurate, that seem too off to both directions. But still, when there is planning, we try to
How do you
explain.
avoid anchoring there, though? Because there's this known psychological or bias that we have called the anchoring effect, where when you give someone a number, you say, "How old was Abraham Lincoln when he was shot? Was he 120?" I've now anchored you to a very old Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
that, and then your estimate is going to be higher.
And
So
then
how do you avoid that with your approach, where you get one person to estimate and then the team challenges it? 'Cause my worry would be that they won't challenge it as much as maybe they should.
uh, you're right. Speaking of incorrect, so if you want it to be really to not cause this, you would need this planning poker where everybody initially has no insight to other people's estimates.
Mm.
Then people arrive to certain range of estimates, but, and then they discuss it. And in the second round, when they do the second round of estimates, they are anchored already.
Yes.
So at the same time, even when you have a team of people and you know that certain person is most likely to do that task, it might be because, for example, so at Griffin, you have teams that are 4 people in one team, right? I guess even if they are full stack, 2 of them will be more back-end leaning, 2 of them will be more front-end leaning. So you will have 1 or 2 people who are most likely to do the task. And they wrote this section of the code base. They know how long it took them.
Hmm.
And from all types of, like in this, I would say planning or estimating is more useful than estimates. I would say I like this type of estimates the most. The size plus, let's say, interval of uncertainty. So let's say 2 weeks.
The error bars, yeah.
Days. This is what I like the most. But if the team wants to do story points, then be it. But this person should know how long it took last time to do similar thing. Because when you
That's the trick, though, similar thing, right? Because let's say we've just built a feature in a domain team. It's the
yeah,
same domain, but it's a new feature, and it's not exactly the same. And if we just say, well, it feels kind of the same, but then it takes 3 times as long, did we do a bad job? Or did we just not understand? Like, it is tricky. That using the past to predict the future is not easy in software, because software tends to be very research and development, R&D focused, right? It's very breaking new ground. If you're just making a new widget that's exactly the same as all the other widgets that you've ever made, it's quite easy to predict. As soon as you're doing something that has some innovation, some new thinking, some remodeling that you have to do, where you have to care about performance and scale, like there are all these factors that every decision you make during that project is a trade-off decision. And some of them are going to go well, and some of them are not, and some of them are going to mean you take way longer to do it than others. and it's just it's incredibly difficult, I found. And it's why I'm not really, even though we have something that maybe works better than anything else I've used before, I still don't think we've solved it, and I don't know if it is even tractable as a problem because it's so difficult.
Because like in theory, people should get better at estimates over time
They
because
should.
they build better understanding of the system. Like in the beginning, when you build a system, initially everything is changing all the time and
Yeah.
nothing's the same. The terminology, the data structures, everything changes completely. But when you are a couple of years in, your domain ideally should represent well the world of your customer. It should use the same terminology. It should use data that are shaped similarly as the domain of the customer. It might take years to get there. But when you have this experience, people should technically get better at estimates because
They should, but do they? My experience is that even really strong engineers, senior, lead, even above that level, they can be an incredible engineer, but sometimes they're either overly pessimistic or overly optimistic every single time with their estimates. And in a way where you think, well, you can't be overly optimistic each time and not sort of update your model because human brains are good at updating our model when reality sort of slaps us around the face and says, no, but I'm not sure we are so good. And there's so much pressure each time to be thinking a little bit more, well, the company needs this fast, so I can't say a long estimate, so I've got to say fast, and I'm a bit nervous about X and Y, but I can't really put my finger on Y, so I'm going to say we can get that done in a month, and then it takes 3 months.
yeah.
Like, have they made a huge error there that they're like off by a factor, right? But I don't know. Sometimes things you just don't know what's involved in it until you start uncovering things. You start pulling on threads. You start realizing, oh, that's touching that bit of the code base that we haven't looked at for 12 months. That's the old way that we used to. We're going to need to type. There's all of that you discover along the way. That it's really difficult when you just ask an engineering team, how long will it take to build feature X? You may as well get them to guess. I mean, that's what they're doing, right? Whereas what I want is let's start with a really broad range and let narrow in as we build up our confidence and our understanding. Let's get closer to the truth,
Yeah.
not care if we're telling the truth day one.
What I found, I have been to over 50 companies in my life, and I found, and most of them are in the Czech Republic. So in the Czech Republic, we use something we call Bulgarian constant. And Bulgarian constant is ×3, that everything takes 3 times longer than expected, which might be connected to the fact that people think the developers are like robots that work 8 hours per day, which is not true. And they actually focus on new feature development only a third of the day. Then they spend some time fixing bugs, going to meeting.
Doing code reviews. Yeah, there's a lot of other things engineers do.
So actually my experience, so as I say, for me, estimation is more important than estimates. I don't even think that teams should commit to certain estimates, but if there is a need for estimates, you have no chance on individual features. It's research and development. It's uncertain. It's not manufacturing. You're not a factory. At the same time, when you have many features to be built over time, it will be, let's say, X features, 50 features, estimate of each feature ×3, and some things will be built faster, some things will be built slower, but in general, you will end up with your former happy path estimate ×3, and this is how long it will take. This is what I have been presenting to customers, and it has been consistent across software development field for a very long time.
So do you ask engineers, what's your estimate? They say 1 month. You say, thank you. And then you tell the company 3 months. Is that what you're saying you do?
One feature, I would feel very uncertain. But if during this 1 month, we would split it to 30 features that are very small, and in total, it would say it's 1 month, I would feel pretty confident, because suddenly the more features you have, the more you split it, the better you understand each feature, the better you understand what will be changed in the system. So it gives you that like statistical significance. If you have just one thing, build it, it will be off. It might be 2 weeks, it might be 1 year. But if it's 30 features, you have much better, let's say, some will be faster, some will be slower, and in the end, it will take 3 months. So
I guess that's connected to your, if you don't do estimates, break things down small, heuristic.
Yes.
It's the same thinking, right? It's the same idea.
The best practice is really to have plenty of small tasks. Always finish something, always show something to customer, always have progress, release often. These are things I consider best practices to deliver software, let's say, in budget, while having huge tasks, giving estimates and having, let's say, 3, 5, 6 months in development, knowing that you finish only 4 tasks, let's say. This is a recipe for disaster every single time. Having small tasks is really the best practice. And even in estimates, I believe teams should split, even when they do estimates and they are not trying to split tasks to, let's say, 1 day, still you should end up at a task size that each developer and QA engineer, whatever, should finish multiple tasks per week.
You know, one other thing that we do that's a little bit, hopefully correct contrarian, but at least contrarian or old school, I would say, is in our pitches, we put quite a lot of effort into requirements and actually capturing requirements in a crisp way and in a standardized way. And a little bit connected to your estimation over estimates idea, it's a similar thinking there, that if you're forced to get to that level of clarity, you're forced to understand the problem space more. But not only that, it gives a clear target for the engineers, that instead of just some diagram or some fluffy idea about this feature with this, screenshot, you have these words that have to be in the domain language that describe when something happens, this other thing should happen so that this person can achieve this outcome, right? That's basically how we do it. It's a job story structure. And there's a huge value there, not just in the clarity of understanding, connecting to estimates as well, because if something has 15 requirements, there's a risk that you're trying to do too much. And if those requirements don't feel close to each other, it's a huge sign that, like you were saying, let's break this up into smaller slices. Let's make this a smaller thing. So it's another sort of indicator about size and complexity that I think is incredibly valuable. And then we get another benefit from it at the verify stage, because when we've built the thing, we can then go through those requirements step by step when we're doing UAT and say, and here's what you said you needed. Here's how the system behaves. Evidence. Here's how the system behaves in that situation. Do you see what I mean? So it also helps you know when you're at the finish line. But I think a lot of companies don't do that. Agile kind of pushed us away. I know user stories are a thing, but there's such a fluffiness to them that they don't feel like the kind of requirements I would want to receive as an engineer. Does that make sense? Yes,
absolutely. Actually, if you have heard about README file-driven development, documentation-driven development, they don't fit to the same, let's say, category. You need to think first really hard to understand what will be built, and then you have to spend time to explain it to others exactly what they will build. So one of the things, the product I was speaking about, it's called Git Review. It's our product. So what we did first, we created a website, we created a sales pitch, we created a wireframe, and then I went and I started selling it. I have presented it to CTOs and IT managers at various companies, and I sold it to multiple companies before we have started developing it. We have internal prototype used for our own needs. We can't sell because it's like single purpose built just for us. But
that's the classic startup approach, right? You build the landing page, you see what the demand is, and if there's enough demand, you actually build the thing.
And now when a new member joins the team, I can run the sales pitch. I can show the sales presentation. I can walk through the prototype. I can explain the business value exactly. So when he joins the company, for him it's not just okay, I'm building some web application, but he can hear for whom I am building what, how the customer will use it, and so on. And I think it helps a lot. Jobs to be done actually are focusing exactly on the same thing. You have those personas. Each persona wants to achieve something, and this you build, or let's say part of the system, must help this persona to achieve certain job to be done. So it's very useful. I think like very lean approach towards writing user stories where you have just a user story title might not be enough, and you might end up with like user story getting back to product owner 3-4 times before being accepted. I think having lightweight backlog might work only if you, on the other side, have absolutely perfect designs and highly visual product. You are building product that has plenty of background processes, so just UX is not enough. While, for example, when we build BI, so it's just, when you build a BI, it's just two things, data sources and visualizations. Data sources have, let's say, some interface, how to get ETL, how to get data from there to our database, and then get data to be visualized. And 80% is actually visualization of the data, how to show it in a way that's useful for the user. So for this case, we could have lighter jobs to be done, user stories, definitions. But in systems where there is plenty of things happening in the background, you must write way more text, actually.
Yeah. Have you, out of interest, have you seen the Rabbit project? It's a Clojure script project. I can't remember the name of the developer, but it's for building interactive BI dashboards, and it's absolutely incredible. It's it has an upside down A, but I think it's just written Rabbit. But if you search for Rabbit data visualization Clojure, you'll find it. It's one of the most impressive pieces of tech I've ever seen. Have you come across it?
No, I haven't.
Check it out later. Wow, it's amazing. It's a very Clojure way of thinking about building BI or MI.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Let's speak a little bit about how Griffin is doing Shape Up. One of the things before we will start is, for a while, many companies were trying to adopt Spotify model, and later people found out that actually they never actually used Spotify model at Spotify.
Yeah.
Started with Scrum, they were iterating towards something. At some point, some teams, never the whole company never worked in a Spotify model. Some teams adopted something like the Spotify model in those famous 2 articles. And then they iterated towards something completely different, and now it's a decade, and there have been many companies who try to adopt that model. I guess at Basecamp, they also started with Shape Up as described in the book, and now they have something else. And at Griffin, you also probably came to the point where you implemented Shape Up and then you changed it. So I'm not only interested where you are now, but also what do you do to improve it and how quickly you change your methodology?
Good question. I don't know what it looks like now at Basecamp. And the gentleman that wrote the book, Ryan, he left. So I guess he's coming up with ideas somewhere else now. So I have no idea at Basecamp. But we basically copy-pasted to start with, because I was sold on the sales pitch of it, on a different way of thinking about the importance of building the right thing, not just building it the right way. And getting the balance between those two things right, because I think a lot of companies don't care enough about building the right thing. And at least this had a shaping phase, and it was giving it the space that I thought it deserved and required to actually be that level of thoughtful about what you're building. So that got me excited about, they've solved one of the problems I had with just pure Agile or Scrum, or where we never put enough thought into what's coming next. And since then, we do retrospectives at the end of each delivery in each team, and then we do broader both product and engineering retros or reflections. We do just the engineering management team reflections on ways of working. So we have lots of different signals coming in about what's working, what's not. We try experiments in individual teams. So when we change something now, we try not to change it across the board unless there's something really broken and it's like a Hail Mary. Okay, that's really broken. Let's just try something as an experiment and we'll just try it everywhere. So that can happen, but normally now it's more one team was a bit unhappy in their retro. They decided they wanted to tweak this one thing. They see how it goes and they report back. And if it's a benefit, if they're going to stick with it, then other teams can be like, okay, we'll try that. And that so we're never perfectly in sync with each other in how we work, but we're often relatively close. There's a sort of lag effect, if you like, and there might be two experiments going on at the same time, and maybe one of them fails and one of them passes, and then so we're not exactly doing the same thing in every team, but there's enough overlap. And it's connected to one of the insights I had earlier this year about principles over process, that you don't want to focus too much on the process. You want to understand, why do we have this hat on? Why do we do this thing? So the way I explained the process was these 6 top level hats that we have on. One is discovering future work that's quite far in the future, product led. One is shaping the next thing we're going to work on. That's much more detail, more engineering involvement, less about understanding customer needs, though that's still part of it, and more about capturing those requirements, shaping a sort of fluffy solution. Then the engineers put on the architect hat. Rather than going straight into build, we need to spend time experimenting. We need to spike. We need to play around. We need to pull at threads in the code base to understand where is the complexity here. That's an important step. How you do that, that's kind of up to the team. But putting that hat on, we agree there's a value to it. We agree there's ways of thinking that's going to help us. Then we build the thing. That can take time. We talked about estimates. We talked about adjusting the plan. That's a big part of that build phase that can grow or shrink quite a lot. And then we do the verification, and finally we do the stabilize. So those are our 6 steps. So every team does some combination of those 6 steps. They would need a pretty strong why to drop one of them, because the value of each one is so clear to us. We're kind of on the same page of the principle behind it. But then within that framework, they're quite free. It's almost like parenting, right? You set some boundaries and you say, kids, this is the edge. Don't go past this. That's dangerous. Within here, you can move around as much as you like. So it's that kind of thinking. But it's changed a lot.
Have like the whole cycle? Is it the same length for all teams, and it doesn't?
No, we don't try and keep them in sync at all. In the beginning, we tried to do that as a kind of like a heartbeat thing and thinking, well, we can do a betting table. So what we've done is just decoupled that and let even within a domain, you'll have several teams, like sub teams within a domain team. We don't really have good names for that yet, but I didn't want to get into the whole squads thing like they do at Spotify. But anyway, so we have separate sub teams or tracks within the team, and those aren't even on the same schedule with each other. So one can be in stabilize while the others are, and it's fine, because it turns out you're not getting that much value by trying to keep it in alignment, and you don't want to stop people working who are done with the thing and can get on something else while they wait for others to catch up. That never felt good. So keeping them in alignment was something we did very early. We got rid of that part.
Also, it's probably safer, because imagine you would have the whole company running its 6-week cycles, and then you would be doing those hyper massive releases where thousands of commits.
Yeah, we want to get it in the production as quickly as possible, preferably behind a feature flag, and then we release it to some customer. It's that quick feedback approach that we're aiming for, and the faster and more confident we can be about hitting that commit and getting it into production, the better everybody feels. It's almost the opposite of that company you were talking about before that had these massive cycles with a huge manual. Like, we want to be as far away from that as humanly possible.
Yes. But you are looking at a company that has at least over 3 decades of history.
I understand. I'm not judging them. I'm just saying we don't want that.
Yeah, in 24 countries, including some like markets like Kazakhstan, Vietnam, USA, each completely different regulations.
Yeah. I mean, it's in those kind of contexts with that kind of constraint, it's a miracle if you can even do what they're doing. So hats off to them. But we're not in that situation, and I think we can do better than that, and that's why we're trying to do what we're doing.
Yeah, they grown from zero. Basically, the richest Czech has grown this business from zero to a business that caters to millions of people worldwide. And then he had he died on heli skiing trip in Alaska. So now the company is managed by his top management. So yeah, but it's the biggest Czech company actually. All right,
Impressive.
you have moved from Apache Kafka to Foundation DB. I wonder what was the issue exactly?
Many different issues, and now I'm dredging my memory a little bit because it's been a while since we did the transition, but performance was definitely one. We always struggled. And impedance mismatch, we were talking about that before. It felt like there were a lot of things that we had to care about with Kafka, about the different queues and the sizing and the configuration that weren't really about the business problem we were solving. And it felt like we were adding complexity. And I get why people pick tools like that, but for us, the trade-off didn't seem quite worth it.
Yeah,
And it restricted us a bit too much, I think. And it meant that it's not a database, and we needed more of a database than that, I
yeah,
think. And so even thinking about the benefits that you get from a well-built database that has more constraints around it and more tooling that it offers you that you then don't need to build. With Kafka as your database, as it were, you're building a lot of that yourself. And that's a heavy engineering lift that takes a lot of time and again is not core business. It's not differentiating.
yeah.
So yeah, a bit of a fluffy answer, but there were a lot of things that weren't quite right, I think, in terms of match for us.
Your architecture is very much inspired by event sourcing.
Yes.
Kafka is seen as a default database
Yes.
for event sourcing nowadays. So
Yes.
at that time, it seems to me it might have been seen as a safe choice. And Foundation DB is definitely very scalable database. You could add data forever, basically. Then you will be sharding them by customer or nested customer. And most likely you will never run out of possibility to scale even more. But it's not the default choice. And you have,
No.
yeah. How does Clojure support Foundation DB?
I mean, it's not a match made in heaven in the team use Clojure or I don't know how many Clojure teams use Foundation DB even. So I think we've definitely had to do some learning and some lifting there, but it definitely doesn't feel like an impedance mismatch either. Because I mean, what we've done is we've built a layer on top of Foundation DB that we call Feat DB that gives us data script querying. So a bit like with Datomic, how it doesn't care what the underlying storage is, it just needs to be reliable. I mean, it can even be like the file system, which obviously isn't that reliable, but they don't recommend that. But it's a very similar idea. So it's Datomic-like thinking on top of Foundation DB, and Datomic storing tuples or facts or datums like Datomic does, I think is a very strong way to think about data from a Clojure perspective. And the querying is incredibly powerful with data log. So in that way, I think we've made Foundation DB more Clojure friendly by adding this DB layer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Would you mind to tell more about the dev stack you are using?
The what tech?
The dev stack, the libraries.
Depend. Oh, dependencies. Yeah, so Bazel is the build tool. So we're not just copying the herd and doing Leiningen or Depseden. But I mean there is some Depseden in there too. But yeah, I I don't think we're doing anything that innovative yet. I'm sure maybe there are some things. I'm not a Bazel expert. That is one part of the code base that I haven't done any pair programming in. I've barely. There's this thing called rules.clojure that Alan, our CTO, wrote that describes the set of build rules that Bazel needs, but for Clojure and for the Clojure compiler. And so there's some real black magic and wonderful stuff, wonderful sorts of technology going on in there. But I'm not really aware of that. So my suggestion would be, I'm not going to give you a bad fluffy answer. Get Alan on the show and ask him, and he'll give you an excellent answer to that.
Okay, perfect. And the last question. So most startups nowadays are built in the USA, even when in Europe, I believe, are as good. We have got two technologies as early as them. Still, the ecosystem is not as big. What can Europe do up with the USA startups?
Oh, that's a big topic that we could talk about for hours, just that one, I think. I worked in investment banking for a while, so I've been around the money side of venture capital and investment in Europe. And there is a different attitude, I think, to risk. And that affects the European market, that people don't seem to want to bet on unsure things as much, maybe, as in America for some reason. I don't know if it's just risk tolerance or what causes that. But it just seems like a good investment strategy to bet on a lot of different things that have quite a low probability, but where if they hit, they hit hard, right? And they become a unicorn. Why we're not as good at that, I don't know. And then it can also become a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you get a self-perception that we're not as good as that, then engineers start leaving and going to California, right? And then there aren't so many people to make a successful one. And it can really become a sort of doom spiral. I hope we're not in that situation. I don't think it's that dire. I used to live in Sweden, and obviously there's more unicorns per capita there than pretty much anywhere else, I think.
Yeah.
So we can do it. I don't know. I feel like I'm babbling now, but it's a big, complicated topic, and I feel like there are many different factors, and I'm sure I don't even know most of them.
Not that long ago, we all were using Nokia phones and Ericsson phones and Siemens phones, and we don't anymore.
No, now we just use Google or Apple, right? Two American companies.
Operating system developed in the USA, the device built either in China or South Korea. And this has happened in 2 decades. It seems to me that in Europe, people value more, let's say, more traditional and smaller businesses. When the company is big, in the USA, it's seen as a success. In Europe, it's seen as a threat. But for example, internet, it's one space. Internet, there is just one internet. It's a huge opportunity in that matter that nowadays you don't have like American internet, British internet, Czech internet, whatever. So when you build a good HR software, for example, of course, if you build a bank, it's highly regulated. But when you build HR software, it might succeed globally. And then the market has been split. So first CRMs, first products like this were created in late 90s, early 80s. This was mainly US companies. And then self-fulfilling prophecy, they got more and more investment. So they were able to grow more and more. And yes, so Skype is from Estonia, Sweden. No, I think.
Estonia originally, yeah, I think.
I remember ICQ, it was from Israel. So there were exceptions, but nowadays it seems to me that the USA was able really to step into each field early, finance it enough to market to the whole market, to this one internet that's global. So no matter you are Polish or from Nigeria, if you are looking for let's say, task management software, you will know about Basecamp, you will know about Asana, you will know about Trello, and all of them will be, Trello is now owned by Atlassian, which is Australian, but it's an exception to the rule. you will always hear about American startups first. It seems to me that what should happen is probably jumping to each topic as fast as Americans have enough funding, and over time, over multiple technological waves, it might even out a little bit. But all things like email providers and search engines, it might be lost. Now the frontier is AI. So in Europe, there is Anthropic is European, it's French, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah, French, yeah.
French. So it's one option or one potential, let's say.
DeepMind had connections with the UK.
Yes.
So some cutting edge AI is Europe based, but they often get bought by American companies. So
UK is doing the best in the whole Europe. I think the UK has the strongest tech sector, comparable with the whole EU has as big tech sector as the UK. It's an exception, and I think English being the native language helps a lot. And also, UK historically has the most advanced financial markets in Europe, which helps a lot. So yeah, you need access to people over internet. You need money, and this might help from my point of view. All right, thank you very much. It was time well spent. We went well over the time budget, but I think it was worth it.
I had a lovely time talking with you. Thank you so much for your questions. It was delightful. And hearing your opinion as well was super interesting. So thank you for sharing that.
Much. And hopefully we can do something like this in a year or so again. Thank you very much.